Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is about the new Israeli Prime Minister. The new Prime Minister is a self admitted murderer. Naftali Bennett says that he has no problem with the fact that he has killed countless Arabs. He was voted in after forming a fragile coalition of opposing parties. Bennett ousted Benjamin Netanyahu, who held the position for 12 years. Bennett is from the political party Yamina, which is even more right-wing than Netanyahu's. 8 years ago, Bennett said that there wouldn't be a Palestinian state inside of Israel. He also does not support a two-state solution for Palestinians, and his political party sees them as the enemy. Israel's far-right leaders agree with Netanyahu's policies of expansion of illegal settlements. They also believe in a greater Israel. Western leaders, including US President Joe Biden, welcomed the new leadership. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has been following former US President Donald Trump's playbook to challenge his fall from power. He claims the election was stolen from him and vows that he'll be back soon. United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said on Sunday that the House leadership did not rebuke Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar last week. This follows a tweet by Omar, which was mischaracterized as her equating the US and Israel with Hamas and Taliban. Omar said she was citing an open case in the International Criminal Court against Israel and the US, Hamas, and the Taliban. She denied comparing democratic countries and terrorist organizations. Pelosi said that the House leadership acknowledged that she made a clarification. She also affirmed that Representative Omar is a valued member of the Democratic Party's caucus. Omar is the first of two Muslim women to serve in U.S. Congress. 4 members of the Canadian Muslim family that were killed in a terrorist attack last week were buried on Sunday. The Afzal family of London, Ontario, were killed by 20-year-old Nathaniel Beltman. Dressed in a military uniform with a swastika emblem, he rammed his truck into them as they waited to cross an intersection during an evening walk. He never served in the army, and he's facing 4 charges of first-degree murder and 1 attempted murder. He's also facing terrorism charges. Under the Canadian Criminal Code, terrorism is partly defined as the intention of intimidating the public or a segment of the public with regard to its security. 4 of the 5 family members out on a walk that day were killed. The 5th, 9-year-old Fayaz Afzal, is recovering in a local hospital. The funeral began after the 4 coffins, which were draped in Canadian flags, arrived at the Islamic Center of Southwest Ontario. It was attended by several hundred mourners as well as religious and community leaders. The ceremony was aired live on Canadian TV news stations and streamed on websites. The family had migrated to Canada from Pakistan 14 years ago. There was an outpouring of grief and mourning at the funeral of the Muslim family killed in a terror attack in Canada. More details by Ali Khalaf, who attended the funeral, as narrated by Saleha Farouk.
This is the final walk for the Afzal family in their beloved city of London. This time they were not on their feet, however. They were carried by their loved ones. 4 coffins wrapped in the Canadian flag. Their lineage reaches the Prophet Muhammad. Their forefathers moved from Yemen to India, then from India to Pakistan. Now they lay buried in London, Canada, until the day when all of us will be raised once again. The grandmother, 74-year-old art teacher Talat Afzal, her granddaughter, Yumna Afzal, the 9th grade artist. Mediha Salman, the 44-year-old environmentalist mother and teacher. Her husband, Salman Afzal, who became a physiotherapist. All murdered by an Islamophobe on June 6, 2021, while taking a walk on a summer evening. Everyone was thinking of the lone survivor, 9-year-old Fayaz. The funeral was held here, at the Islamic Center of Southwest Ontario. The mother and brother of Mediha Salman arrived from Pakistan. Muslims gathered from all across Ontario. Many neighbors of the other faiths came together to participate in the final services.
We are from a very small town, 100 kilometers from London, from here. In the last 3 years, Syrian Muslim refugee families have come to our town with children that we love and care for. And we value their friendship very much. And we hope that our friends from Syria that we are close to, and all Muslims in Canada, can live in peace and safety in Canada, inshallah.
The family came from a village 100 kilometers away from London. Eyes were full of tears as hearts weep, thinking of hate, thinking of love, thinking of young Fayaz who saw it all, wondering about the lost lives as they pray for God to give them peace and mercy. This is too heartbreaking to see 3 generations of a family just wiped out like that, Holder said shortly before the start of the public funeral. Imam Araj Anwar says we are grieving. London's Muslim community is feeling emotionally exhausted after
our personal
a week
capacity.
Of grief.
We're grieving in this public capacity in the janazah today. We're grieving in our homes and in our masajid, because this family was so beloved to us, so dear to us, and now they're taken away from us.
The Afzal family will be back together with Allah, the God, the merciful, their mercy-giving, in Jannah as Shaheed, once again with their forefather, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
A mysterious bidder has won a seat to fly with Jeff Bezos into space next month. The winning bid, $28 million. The identity of the bidder will be disclosed before they and Jeff Bezos begin the 10-minute trip on July 20th. The auction for the seat drew 7,600 bidders from 159 countries. This led to a winning bid that was well beyond what the organizers had expected. Amateur astronauts can choose from a range of options. This includes flying only 65 miles above the Earth in low orbit to flying towards the International Space Station 200 miles above the planet. That choice will determine if they will blast off at a few thousand miles per hour or at the speed of 17,000 miles per hour. Gun violence is reaching an epidemic stage in America. There have been almost 270 mass shootings this year. According to the Gun Violence Archive, this is 48% higher than 2020 and 65% higher than 2019. Over this weekend alone, 47 people in 6 states were victims of gun violence. 8 people were shot on Friday in Savannah, Georgia. That same day, 4 women and a girl were shot in Dallas. 14 were shot in Austin, Texas, 10 in Chicago, and 10 in Ohio on Saturday. The U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment protects the right of citizens to bear arms. It's often quoted by gun rights activists and the National Rifle Association. In international news, as G7 leaders closed their summit in Cornwall, United Kingdom yesterday, they pledged to donate more than 1 billion vaccines to struggling nations. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the vaccines would be distributed both directly and through COVAX. COVAX is the United Nations backed program delivering vaccines to low and middle income countries. There was also a joint communication addressing China's record with respect to human rights and fundamental freedoms. This includes the oppression of Uyghur Muslims in detention camps. China has come under strong international criticism for running the biggest concentration camps since Nazi Germany. As the G7 summit was underway on Saturday, thousands attended a pro Palestine solidarity march in London. Demonstrators called on G7 leaders to support Palestinian rights as they marched towards 10 Downing Street. They're demanding an end to complicity in Israel's war crimes against the Palestinians by the United Kingdom and other G7 governments. Israel's 11-day bombardment of Gaza last month killed 253 Palestinians, including at least 66 children. Experts say a Russian disinformation campaign to discredit the Pfizer vaccine was launched almost as soon as the FDA gave approval for its usage. The campaign suggests the vaccine was dangerous and even deadly. Russian media outlets and social media prompted baseless claims that the people had died after receiving the vaccine. Russian media outlets and social media promoted baseless claims that people had died after receiving the vaccine. They also claimed that both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines caused blood clots. Dr. Margaret Harris of the World Health Organization said that the infodemic, as she called it, is almost as bad as the pandemic. According to the WHO, the campaign was designed to decrease public confidence in the effectiveness of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The European External Action Service highlighted in a report that both Russia and China were working to do this. Russia has provided 150,000 doses of its Sputnik vaccine to India. They're also offering free cars to spur Russians to get COVID vaccine. A day after the parliamentary elections in Algeria, the Communications Ministry canceled the accreditation of international TV news network France 24. A ministry spokesman said that was due to the channel's clear and repeated hostility towards the country and its institutions. France 24 was also accused of practicing disinformation and manipulation in addition to confirmed hostility against Algeria. The French state-owned network channels broadcasted in French, English, Arabic, and Spanish. Based in Paris, they aim towards the overseas market. West African countries are dominated by French media. Muslims in the Central African Republic blame French media's spread of Islamophobia for instigating attacks on the Muslim community. The head of the Israeli mission in Morocco has not been able to find an appropriate office. For the last 6 months, the mission has been working with several agencies to find a suitable property, but have not been successful. David Govrin is head of the Israel's liaison office in Morocco. He said the mission had found a suitable residence through an agency. However, after the landlords found out who it was for, they turned down the offer. According to Moroccan news reports, this is not the first time he has been turned down. Currently, Govrin is staying and working out of a hotel in Rabat since his appointment 6 months ago. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. Earlier on our show tonight, we reported on the news of terrorist charges on the murderer who killed the Afzal family in an Islamophobic attack in London, Ontario. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Saliha Farouk, who is with a representative of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Over to you, Saliha.
Thank you. Today we're here with Fatima Abdullah, who is a communications coordinator at the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM. Fatima, thank you so much for being here with us, given the recent tragic events that have happened in London, Ontario.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Now, starting with the biggest development in the story this morning, we've learned that prosecutors were actually approved in laying terrorism charges against perpetrator Nathaniel Veltman. The NCCM have actually been pursuing terror charges since you began to respond to the event. Tell me about what the public can expect following this news this morning.
Well, it is a developing story, but there is an important need for those who inflict terror on our community to be treated consistently with the acts of terror. And historically, there has been a problematic application of terrorism legislation, especially when it comes to those who perpetrated attacks and acts of terror on our community, on our Muslim community. But today's charges showcase that we will never be intimidated, and that we will continue to fight for the rights and the civil liberties of Canadian Muslims.
Thank you so much for that. Now, Fatima, your organization, the NCCM, have been really one of the first to break the news of the attack on June the 6th. And interestingly, one of the initiatives that you're proposing is something called the National Action Summit on Islamophobia. And as you highlighted, such requests after similar anti-Muslim hate crimes have been met, unfortunately, in the past with little support. Regarding this proposed summit by the NCCM, tell us a little bit about the trajectory that you hope for when it comes to this initiative.
Yeah, well, as you've noted, there's been a number of a number of hate-motivated attacks on the community, on the Muslim community, including the Quebec City mosque attack in 2007 and 2017, including an attack outside of the IMO Mosque in Toronto, on Brother Muhammad Aslam Zafez, as well as the overall 14 reported hate-motivated attacks against Muslim women in Alberta, both in Calgary and Edmonton. So this showcases that there is an urgent need for us to combat the roots of systemic racism and the roots of Islamophobia within our nation, which is the reason why we are calling for a whole-of-government approach with the National Action Summit. With the National Action Summit, we're hoping for members of the provincial government, the federal government, and the municipal government to sit down and come up with real tangible policy measures, real tangible change, so that future attacks like this are reprimanded and no longer happen.
Now, that leads me to my next question. Just a couple of days after some Conservative Party members of Parliament blocked a motion condemning Islamophobia, this weekend, representatives from all parties decided to come together and to support a Islamophobia motion in government. Now, in your perspective, how important would it be for all members of provincial or whether federal level members of government to support a nationwide condemnation of violence against Canadian Muslims? I know you touched a little bit upon that already.
Condemnation is great. We saw after the 2017 attacks in Quebec City Mosque, at the Quebec City Mosque, we saw the Prime Minister designate a whole day against Islamophobia, and it is all great to have. It is all great stuff, but more needs to be done. We do need to see more tangible change and more tangible action. Last weekend, outside of the London Vigil, we heard every single provincial and federal leader speak up for the need for change, for the need for action. And so, hopefully, with the outcomes of the National Action Summit, we are able to see those tangible changes and those tangible measures towards action against Islamophobia.
Now, there have been vigils all across Canada and across Ontario, and most recently, there has been the funeral of the family in London, Ontario. Given your unique position, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the community reaction and the community sentiments. What are people telling you? What's the reaction of the people around you in terms of families, schools, institutions, nonprofit organizations? What can you tell us today about what they're feeling in the community?
I feel like after every single one of such hate motivated attacks, the community feels the same sense of shock at first, and then subtle numbness. The sense that we are getting from the community, the questions that have been asked, the multiple fearful questions that are being asked, is how many more lives, how many more people would have to be subjected to hate motivated and terror attacks just because of their identity, just because of their faith, just because of their religion. And so that is one of the fears that is circulating across many communities throughout Canada. And people are worried about whether or not they can step outside in public spaces. People are worried whether or not they could step on public transport systems wearing a hijab. And that should not be a fear within our country, and that should not be something that many of our brothers and sisters are afraid to do.
Precisely. Now, at this time, what are some of the recommendations or perhaps demands that the NCCM are bringing to the Canadian government? What are they recommending at this time that you could share with us, perhaps?
Yeah. So there's many action plans that need to be discussed throughout the National Action Summit at all levels of government, including the federal government level of government, the provincial level of government, as well as the municipal level of government. But some of the specific asks include dismantling the 250 white supremacist organizations that still have the ability to mobilize and organize throughout our society today, as well as strengthening laws against online hate as well as street harassment. Many of the attacks that we have seen, including the attacks that we've seen in Alberta, were against individuals on the street, individuals that were going about their daily lives outside of public transport stations or at public parks. And this most recent attack in London was seen with a family who was just walking outside for a nightly walk. So this showcases that street harassment laws do need to be strengthened as well. And those are a few of the asks that we are hoping to speak about at the National Action Summit.
Thank you so much for that really great insight there. I wanted to bring attention to the nature of your organization. You are very used to dealing with hate crimes and the proposed responses to hate crimes. If you could talk to us about the community level or maybe society level impact of such events like this in our community. Why do we need to perhaps stop such events from happening in their tracks? What is the long-term impact that we're trying to avoid here, or that the NCCM is trying to counter?
Well, we're trying to counter and dismantle Islamophobia across our country for good. We won't be intimidated, and that is why it's important for us to showcase to our community that we're here to support, we're here to stand up, and that we will never be intimidated with such acts of terror, with such acts of discrimination and racism against our people.
Now, just concluding question here for you. Your organization functions on a national level, but I know that you might have different modes of support from perhaps some members of the government to nonprofit organizations or associations, or just plain advocates and activists on the ground. If you could talk to us a bit about the kind of support you might have received, or maybe the support that you're looking for in order to make your initiatives or your recommendations to the government successful.
I know that overall, even the London family has mentioned that the outpour of support has been phenomenal. Members from Canadian Muslims from across the country have gotten together and have stood up against Islamophobia and against discrimination. So one thing that the National Council of Canadian Muslims can continue to ask for is to continue to speak out with your voices, is to continue to stand up against hate and discrimination, is to continue to follow our social media platforms at NCCM_community on Instagram or at NCCM on Twitter. Continue to amplify the voices so that this just mobilizes across in a lot stronger and strengthened manner.
Fatima Abdullah is the Communications Coordinator at the National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM. Fatima, I do thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. Back to the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. The struggle in Sheikh Jarrah is over a decade long and is fought on many levels: legal, political, and in the media. The story of a well-organized group of Jewish Israelis, colonists, who wish to dispossess Palestinian families of their homes is not unique to Sheikh Jarrah. Dr. Shir Hever is joining Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid to speak on this topic. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. We have someone today who has deep insight into what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. He used to be one of the person who participated in the protest there as early as in 2009. He is no longer protesting there. Actually, he's no longer living there. He is coming to us from Heidelberg, Germany. Welcome, Dr. Shir Hever.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Shir Hever is author of The Privatization of Israeli Security. Tell us why you felt uncomfortable in the protest in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood.
I have been protesting against the Israeli occupation, against Israeli colonialism and apartheid when I lived in Israel. And also I'm continuing to protest from Germany today. But, there is ethnic cleansing all over Palestine. And in every place where Palestinians have a long heritage, there are attempts by various Israeli forces to try to get rid of them, to displace them, take over their lands. Sheikh Jarrah is one of those places. But what makes Sheikh Jarrah special is that there's also there's also a history in that neighborhood of Jewish people who live there and have escaped from their homes in the War of 1948, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the destruction of their homeland and the deportation of the majority of the population. There were about 750,000 Palestinians who were driven out of Palestine during this war, but there were also a few families, Jewish families, who were also driven out of their homes in that war, a much smaller amount, and some families came from Sheikh Jarrah. And the reason that I felt a bit uncomfortable when I was protesting against ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah back in 2009 is that together with me there and with Palestinian activists, there were also Zionist activists. There were also Zionist leftist activists who usually do not protest ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But in that particular case, they said the court case, which colonists are using in order to take over the Palestinian homes, is creating a dangerous precedent. If the Israeli court would say that Jewish families can reclaim their property on the other side of the Green Line from houses that were taken away in the War of 1948, then those Palestinian refugees that have lost their properties inside Israel in that war will also be able to claim their property back. And in order to prevent that kind of precedent, they wanted to protest against the deportation of families from Sheikh Jarrah. But I think that, the protest is of course justified, but the reasons for the protest did make me a bit uncomfortable.
Tell us this. So Sheikh Jarrah that neighborhood issue was not born yesterday. If you were protesting in 2009, this is a long-held issue. How come in American media didn't pop up on the horizon until recently?
The American media is only covering stories about Palestine if there is a lot of bloodshed and a lot of chaos going on. And in that sense, there is no reason specifically to focus on Sheikh Jarrah. There are so many other places where there are Israeli forces ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their homes. But I think the reason for the timing of this particular crisis happening in Sheikh Jarrah this month of May, this month of Ramadan, is that the Israeli forces, or specifically the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, wanted to create a crisis that will sabotage his opponents from forming a coalition. And he timed it very carefully. What he did, he sent one of the newly appointed members of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a very extremist right-wing activist. And actually his party used to be banned in Israel. It used to be illegal, but Netanyahu made it legal again. And he formed his office in Sheikh Jarrah, in the neighborhood. He also put out tables outside on the street to provoke people and put food and drinks on them during the month of Ramadan to try to mock or to provoke the Muslims who are fasting. And then Netanyahu said, when the time has come near for the coalition to form against him, then Netanyahu told Itamar Ben-Gvir, this member of parliament, you can leave the office in Sheikh Jarrah, but in exchange, I will bring in police forces to take your place in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, but also in the mosque of Al-Aqsa. And when the Israeli forces came in large numbers to Al-Aqsa and started beating up the people who were praying, and also, of course, they were attacking the people in Sheikh Jarrah and in the Damascus Gate, that's when, of course, the media started to notice it. And there was a crisis, and indeed it worked for Netanyahu because the coalition talks collapsed. But and then there was, of course, a mini war or a confrontation with the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Air Force bombed the Gaza Strip for 11 days, killing more than 250 people. And after the ceasefire was achieved with Gaza, only then the coalition was able to form, and in order to replace Netanyahu.
You mentioned there are a variety of forces who want to evict Palestinian from Sheikh Jarrah. Could you define who are those people? Are these people actual people who used to live there, Jewish people before 48, who are the one want to have their house back? Or these are other people? And, could you define that? Who actually is the one who wants Palestinian out?
Yeah, you use the word eviction, and I think we should be careful about using that word. The word creates exactly this sort of illusion, as if these are people who own the houses, as if they are the landlords and the Palestinians are the tenants, and they're trying to just evict the tenants. But the reality that we see is actually that it's not the same people who used to own these houses or their descendants who are claiming the houses now. The former chief attorney, state attorney of the state of Israel, actually told the story that his own grandmother used to own one of these houses. And after she had to escape in 1948 to the Israeli side during the war, she was compensated for the house by the Israeli government. So from her point of view, the story was over. And now he learns that this group of colonists, right-wing colonists, have taken over the house and are renting it out to the Palestinians who live there, but they are saying you have to pay the rent of hundreds of thousands of dollars every month, which is, of course, crazy. Nobody can pay that amount of money. What they're really trying to do is to get these people out. And the chief attorney, the former chief attorney, said, I don't remember that we sold the house to this Jewish family. So no, they are not the descendants of the owners of these apartments and houses. They are a political group. And they are supported by groups in the United States, which are giving them money for their legal proceedings. And they are putting a lot of pressure on the Israeli court system. And the Israeli courts have actually surrendered to that system because the government has replaced all
You're saying that it is paid for by groups in the United States. Who are those people who are paying for expelling Palestinians from homes?
There was a study conducted by a journalist called Max Blumenthal, and there were some other studies as well that showed that those far-right groups in the Israeli political scene are given more money by Christian groups in the United States than by Jewish groups. There is a kind of myth that there is a big Jewish community in the United States that supports the colonization of Palestine by Israel, and that is not correct. In fact, a lot of American Jews have changed their opinions and are fiercely opposing Israeli colonization. But there are Christian evangelical groups, born-again Christians, such as Father Hagee, and part of their theology is that there has to be a great war between Jews and Muslims in the Holy Land in order to bring the end times and the second coming of Christ. And this is a very dangerous theology. According to this theology, Jews don't have a place in this world. Jews who refuse to convert to Christianity will be condemned to hell. So normally Jews are very reluctant to receive support and money from these Christian groups, these far-right Christian groups. But in the last couple of decades, especially in the last 2 decades, these groups have started to give more and more money, and some of those far-right Jewish Zionist groups have agreed to accept this money because it makes it easier for them to take over Palestinian land. But I think that money is not enough. When you have a very strong commitment of Palestinians to stay on their land and not to give up and to continue to resist Israeli colonization, then it doesn't matter how many millions of dollars are given by these Christian evangelical groups. The process of colonization is still meeting with strong resistance.
Changing topics slightly away from this ethnic cleansing or Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, How many Israelis actually know about Beit Salem and their designation of Israel as apartheid state between Israel and Palestinian occupied land?
B'Tselem is the largest Israeli human rights organization. Every Israeli knows about B'Tselem. And in fact, several years before the report by B'Tselem that clearly stated and also proved that the state of Israel is an apartheid state, there was a survey among Israelis that asked, do you think that Israel is an apartheid state? More than 60% of Israelis said yes. This is before B'Tselem published their report. But then there was a second question in the survey. Do you think that it's a good thing that Israel is an apartheid state? And the majority of those who said, yes, it's a good thing. Meaning that most Israelis know there is apartheid. Most Jewish Israelis at least, support this apartheid situation. Because there is a Hebrew word for apartheid, it's called hafrada. And in Hebrew, the word hafrada, which means the same thing as apartheid, means separation or segregation, is very often used by politicians to describe the policies. The wall of separation, for example, is built in order to prevent Palestinians and Israelis from meeting each other, from becoming friends, from falling in love and getting married. There are laws that Israelis that go into Area A of the West Bank, the areas under the control of the Palestinian Authority, will be arrested and they will have to pay a fine, allegedly because they are putting their own security at risk. But of course, it is in order to try to prevent people from meeting each other. This is segregation of populations. And in Israel, of course, you can get married with whoever you want, and your spouse will become an Israeli citizen. This is like in every other country in the world. But there is an exception. If the spouse is a Palestinian, then they will not become an Israeli citizen. And this is, of course, a situation of apartheid.
That's interesting. So instead of people fully knowing what it is, they say, yes, it is apartheid, and then say it is good for Israel. I mean, that I didn't know, and I'm shocked to hear that. Are they aware of the history of apartheid in South Africa?
Well, I don't know how much Israelis know about the specifics of the history, but I think we have a lot to learn from the history of apartheid in South Africa. And when I say we, I mean everyone who is interested in what is happening in Israel-Palestine, and anyone who wants to have hope to see a change in this situation and equality and freedom for everyone who lives there. You know, in South Africa, during the last days of apartheid, the white population of South Africa, more than 90% of it, continued to support apartheid until the very end. They said, we need apartheid for our security. Apartheid protects us from the black population that wants to kill us all. And when apartheid collapsed in South Africa in 1994, 1 week after the fall of apartheid, all of the same white population that supported apartheid said, oh, we were always against it. And I think it is a very interesting phenomenon to see how people apparently change their mind, but it's not really that they have changed their minds. They were always against it, and they also supported it at the same time. And this is the situation in Israel as well. The Israeli population, the Jewish Israeli population, is aware of the very deep injustice in which they live. And they live in a great fear because they know that Palestinians have a very good reason to be angry and to demand justice. And they don't know in what form this justice will come. Will there be great revenge against them for all of these years of injustice? As soon as there is justice, as soon as there is a solution where Palestinians have equal rights and they have no reason to take revenge anymore, then I think the Israelis would also say, oh, we always rejected apartheid. We were always against it. And meaning that they only express their support for apartheid because it's an expression of their fear.
So in that situation, when the human rights report also came out considering Israel is committing crime of apartheid, probably the media, it was not a headline in the media because people already know it and it's okay.
Actually, that is true. The Human Rights Watch is one of the world's two biggest human rights organizations in the world. And shortly after this report by B'Tselem that came in January, at the end of April, Human Rights Watch published their report, also saying that Israel is an apartheid state. I think it's very interesting that the reasoning is different in the report by B'Tselem and the report by Human Rights Watch. They have a different legal interpretation, but both of them reach the same conclusion in the end, that it is an apartheid situation, not just in the occupied territory, but in the entire territory, which is something between the river and the sea, including the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and also the state of Israel in between. But what I think Israelis realize is that it doesn't really matter if human rights organizations are making these accusations and these reports if there is no consequence. And Israelis are much more paying attention to the decision of the International Criminal Court to begin an investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity conducted by the Israeli military. And this investigation could actually lead to a situation where Israelis who travel to their vacation in Europe will be arrested and faced with charges for war crimes. And this is something a lot of Israelis are very much afraid of. And one of the International Criminal Court has a list of crimes. One of those crimes is the crime of apartheid. I think it's very troubling that the Palestinian government in Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority, did not include the crime of apartheid in their complaints to the International Criminal Court. They did not include it. And that makes it impossible for the International Criminal Court to investigate this crime because somebody has to put the charges forward. And I think now there is a large movement in the West Bank to call on President Mahmoud Abbas to resign from his position because of his failure to resist the Israeli occupation. And perhaps there will be, he canceled the elections that were supposed to happen this year. But I think at some point there will be a new leadership for the Palestinians. And I hope that this leadership will take the crime of apartheid seriously. And I think when this happens, then Israelis will also pay more attention to the report by the Human Rights Watch and by B'Tselem.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shever-Hever. Thank you for your thoughts. Appreciate it. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook page. Make sure to like and subscribe. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV and visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.